Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session, Multiple Benefits of Energy Efficiency. I'm Cassandra Cubes with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I will be moderating this session. And we'll start with a few announcements and then move to presentations and finish the session with Q&A. First, I'd like to thank ACEEE for hosting this conference, and a thank you to the sponsors and ally members of ACEEE as well. So when asking questions, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to the questions after all the presentations. And if we don't get to your question, or if you would like to continue the discussion after this session, please join us for a 20-minute Zoom Q&A session immediately following this session at 2:45. You can look for the Zoom link to be posted in the chat later, or you can find it on your screen. Please refrain from using the chat for any dialogue other than asking questions. On the app, look to the options on the left-hand side where you can connect with other attendees and even play a game where you could win a free registration to the next 2023 EER conference. You can visit the resources section to download a PDF of the program, Zoom links for the post-session discussion, and a conference evaluation form. And if you complete the evaluation and include your name and a testimonial, you'll receive a discount to attend the next EER conference. All presentations will be available for on-demand viewing within a few days on this engagement hub. And PowerPoint presentations can be found on each presenter's page in the program participants section. So now I would like to kick things off with a brief presentation describing a new EPA tool for assessing energy efficiency impacts. I will share my screen. Bear with me for one moment. Okay, so I will be giving an overview of the Energy Savings and Impact Scenario Tool, or ESIST, which is set for release later this year. And first, some background on the program that I work for. I'm a senior policy specialist with the State and Local Climate and Energy Program at EPA. Our team provides technical support and develops resources to help state, local, and tribal governments to reduce emissions and meet their energy, environmental, and economic policy goals. Here's a graphic describing some of our recent resources and tools, including on the left-hand side in green, our GHG inventory tools for state, local, and tribal governments. In the center in orange, you can see some of our tools, mainly AVERT, COBRA, and the Health Benefits per Kilowatt Hour tool. These tools are used to assess emissions and health impacts of clean energy. And to the right, our Heat Island Reduction Program that provides resources to support heat island mitigation strategies. So those are just a few of the things that the state and local program offers, and these slides are available on the platform to look through our resources further later. So the new tool I'll be describing today fits within the center suite of tools in orange as a resource to help decision makers design and compare policies. So the Energy Savings and Impact Scenario Tool, or ESIST, is an Excel-based planning tool for analyzing energy savings costs and a set of multiple benefits from customer-funded energy efficiency programs. We are planning to release this tool later this year, and I'll pull up a link in a moment here to show you where you can sign up to receive an alert when this resource is available. So the tool combines several data sets to streamline analyses and inform decision-making on energy efficiency policies and programs. And in particular, ESIST can help users to generate scenarios based on a state, a specific utility and sector, or you can assess a nationwide scenario as well. And outputs from the tool span the recent past, 2010 through 2040. And ESIST can also estimate a set of multiple benefits from energy efficiency, including avoided emissions, public health impacts, peak demand impacts, and energy burden impacts for low-income customers as well. And users can look to the tool to support the design of energy efficiency policy goals, either by itself or in tandem with other tools. So here's a little bit on target users. and use cases. We anticipate this tool to be useful for energy offices, PUCs, analysts, utilities, air quality planners, public health professionals, and really any other energy efficiency stakeholder interested in planning and assessing customer-funded energy efficiency programs. And we're intending for ESIS to be used in a variety of ways. Some of those listed here include quantifying the impacts of efficiency programs toward achieving spendings or savings targets, whether that be existing or expanding or decreased or new targets, facilitating a comparison of a set of costs and benefits to inform utility cost effectiveness tests, estimating the combined effects of energy efficiency programs in a state or nationwide. And ESIS can be used to understand energy burdens for populations, low-income and non-low-income populations in a given jurisdiction that you choose. And you can estimate the level of program investment to reduce those burdens. So here's a link that I was talking about to sign up for the state and local climate and energy programs newsletter to be notified of the release of ESIS later this year. And you can access this link from the slide deck in the PDF. And here's my contact information if you would like to reach out with any questions. And with that, I'm going to pause there, and I will turn things over to Julie, who I will introduce now. Hi, Julie.
Good afternoon.
All right, so we can hear you. Thank you. So next we'll hear from Julie Michaels, Director of Clean Energy Evaluation at E4the-Future. Julie will share an overview of which states account for what energy efficiency impacts and cost effectiveness testing, and we'll take a closer look at accounting for certain societal non-energy benefits. So whenever you're ready to share your screen, take it away, Julie.
Okay. Let's see, make sure I've got this all set up okay. All right. You can see my screen, Cassandra? I'm assuming the answer is yes. I will start then. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As Cassandra said, I am here to share information with you about the accounting of societal non-energy benefits in efficiency cost effectiveness testing. So to start off, I'm going to, here's an overview of what I'll be talking about. And essentially, I'm going to give you an overview of what practice looks like around the country. How do states account for energy efficiency impacts in their cost effectiveness testing practices? And I'll be referring to a database that E4the-Future developed and manages that tells us, gives us some insight into generally what that practice looks like across utility system impacts, host customer impacts, and societal impacts, generally those three broad categories. And then I'm going to do a closer dive into societal non-energy benefits, which are the ones that are commonly accounted for, which are not, and why not, what are some of the challenges, but what are some of the emerging trends we're seeing in states paying more attention to accounting for important societal NEBs. And then lastly, I'll touch on methodologies for accounting for societal impacts and some of the resources. You're hearing Cassandra share information with some of the ones EPA has developed, but I'd like to share with you some forthcoming information and resources that E4the-Future is developing. So a little bit about the DSP. This is a database developed by the National Energy Screening Project, NESP, which also has developed the National Standard Practice Manual for benefit cost analysis for distributed energy resources. And this repository database includes electric, gas, ratepayer-funded efficiency program cost effectiveness practices across all jurisdictions in the US. There's detailed information on the types of impacts included, the supporting policies and documents for those impacts, as well as what types of tests are used, some key assumptions like discount rates, And this tool is updated periodically. It's due for an update early next year. We have a new program manager we've brought on, Natalie Fortman at E for the Future, who's going to be leading this effort. And we encourage all of you to take a look at this resource and let us know what you think, and also, if there's any information that is needing some updating. So a quick look at what's in this repository. This is the whole host of impacts, both utility system impacts, participant impacts, societal impacts, as well as the type of test that's used, and different levels of assessment and so forth. So a whole lot of data in this resource. And the impact categories here largely align with the NSPM for DERs, but this is an evolving space. As we all know, areas related to energy equity and broadly to other distributed energy resources, the specific impact categories, this is not an exhaustive list that includes them, but they are the main areas, and I'll be speaking to some of them and identifying some areas where we need to do some expanding. So let's talk a little bit about electric utility system impacts. Here's a snapshot. This is actually an output from the DSP. It just tells us how many states account for what impact. So we've got the utility system costs in the blue and the benefits in the green. And, no surprise, you see that the majority of states account for many of the costs and some of the core avoided cost benefits. But then, as you get more into looking at avoided costs of complying with certain environmental compliance costs and renewable portfolio standards, wholesale price suppression effects, there's a whole range of things going to accounting for reduced risk and increased liability. These impacts are less likely to be included in some cases because of policies around environmental policies. There may not be an RPS in the state, for example, or a organized market like a wholesale market like ISO New England or PJM. But some of these other areas, they're hard to quantify impacts. And what we're seeing, of course, is that states don't always quantify them, such as risk and reliability and resilience. And you'll hear more from JP on that particular area. And this is an area that we would like to see states accounting for more often, given the importance and value, and that we know the value is not zero. Host customer impacts, again, most states account for measure costs, and then some benefits. But as you can see, there's a real asymmetry issue. And a core fundamental principle of the National Standard Practice Manual is if you're going to include the incremental measure costs that participants pay or host customers pay, you really should include the associated benefits to those customers. They're hard to quantify in some cases, but either you include them both and value them in one form or another, or you do not. And this tells us that story that there's asymmetry, especially in states that use a TRC or some modified version of it. And there's a need to better address accounting for non-energy benefits. And you'll hear more from Jimmy up in Ontario about some of the research and work they've done in this regard. So societal impacts. This is the range of them that are included in the DSP. And this actually comes from the NSPM descriptions of the different societal impacts. And I'm going to touch on each of these in the next slide, just to give a flavor of the type of developments we see, the type of issues that come up. We're actively working right now in various states to apply the National Standard Practice Manual. And in those states, one of the core principles of the NSPM is to align with your policies. Your cost effectiveness testing should reflect your policies. If you have policies with goals and objectives to create jobs, to improve energy security, or address environmental goals, especially GHG goals, we see more and more of. Low-income vulnerable populations, energy equity issues, public health issues, resilience. These are all broadly goals that are often articulated in statute or legislation. And the NSPM is helping jurisdictions identify what those goals are, and then whether or not, based on those goals, policies, they should be accounting for these types of impacts. And then, of course, the question is how to account for them if they are relevant to that jurisdiction. And in many cases, these are not all monetizable in every case. In some cases, they can be quantified, but not monetized. And in some cases, they're qualitative. And so these are all considerations we see jurisdictions grappling with how best to account for them. So the current landscape, a little bit of, expanding on what I just spoke about. So, these are listed in alphabetical order, not in order of importance. But what you can see here from the DSP in the bottom chart is that, not many states account for economic development. Only one accounts for energy security. Some account for environmental impacts, and many account for low-income type of societal impacts. And I think we're going to be seeing more of exactly what metrics are determine what are those societal values. And not only to society, but of course, we've got metrics associated with host customers as well in that regard. So with economic development, the NSPM does provide guidance on this in terms of that one can quantify job creation and other forms of GDP value to economic development to a state. But that tells us something different than a benefit cost analysis based on the investment in that resource. And so the NSPM advises, and we do see this in some jurisdictions where there's consideration of economic development as part of the decision-making process, but that it is separate from the benefit cost analysis. One is not translating job years into some monetized value that goes into the BCA. Energy security, hard to quantify, but we do see qualitative assessment in that one jurisdiction. That's something else that needs some more attention. Environmental impacts, important to differentiate between avoided compliance costs that are within a utility system impact, where the utility needs to comply with either achieving certain criteria, air pollutant reduction, SOx and NOx, whether there are certain GHG compliance related costs, such as a cap and trade system like RGGI, or some other way of quantifying and having a specific compliance value. But beyond that, what sometimes is referred to as externalities, the societal environmental impacts we don't see a lot of states accounting for those necessarily, 14 of the states. And yet we know that many more states have pretty aggressive climate change goals, and yet those achieving those goals, 80% by 2030 or whatever it may be, is not typically reflected in the societal value. And that is something that we are trying to build more understanding of, and the need to account for that in cost effectiveness. Low-income customer, vulnerable communities. This is a growing area of focus, as you all know, and there have been some other sessions on this at this conference, and I'll speak to that in a minute on the next slide. Public health, again, another area that many statutes identify the value of efficiency and clean energy technologies as providing broad public health benefits. And EPA has some tools, the benefits per kilowatt hour tool, to help states quantify this. But most states do not currently account for public health. And we do see some changes. I reference here an Illinois Societal Health NEI report. So we are, and as we see one or two states starting to look at this, it's great to have those examples to point to. And resilience, again, I won't get into this too much because JP will be addressing resilience, but again, important to consider the broader impacts, not just to the utility, not just to host customers, but to society as a whole. and we know the value is not zero. So a quick note on energy equity in benefit cost analysis. This is something that E4the Future, as part of our work on NSPM and as we're advising commissions and states on updating their benefit cost frameworks, is where does energy equity fit in to benefit cost analysis? It also fits in largely to rate impact analysis, which is separate from a BCA. And then, of course, there is a host of other metrics, largely one could refer to them as procedural metrics, that are neither within a BCA analysis or a rate impact analysis. So we see things like reduced energy burden, impact on rates, impact on bills, participation in programs. Those are all very rate and bill impact related. And on the benefit cost side, we see things like economic development, energy security, access to services, health and safety, environmental resilience, these types of metrics. This is a work in progress, and we are coordinating with others, including ACEEE, to make sure that as we think about measuring progress towards equity goals, that we think about it in the context of BCA, both at the host customer and societal level. A quick note on methods for quantifying impacts. We are actively working. The NASP project is working to develop a handbook that's referred to a methods, tools, resources handbook for quantifying impacts. And this will be across the full range of utility system impacts, host customer and societal. And while Appendix C of the NSPM for DRs touches on the types of approaches that can be used to quantify impacts, especially hard to quantify impacts, we're taking this appendix to a whole other level with this very comprehensive handbook that can help jurisdictions identify everything from modeling tools and techniques to address quantify avoided T&D losses, to addressing risk and uncertainty, to addressing resilience, and as well as the full range of societal impacts. And so here's an overview of what this project will entail. And that's coming soon, the end of this year. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. That was a great overview. All right, next, and I should say too to folks in the audience, please submit your questions as you think of them through your chat box, and we'll plan to get to them at the end of everyone's presentation. And then if we don't get to them, as I said earlier, plan to join that Zoom session that we will hold immediately following. So next we'll hear from Juan Pablo Carvalho, who's a Principal Scientific Engineering Associate in the Electricity Markets and Policy Department at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. JP will review existing metrics and methods to quantify the reliability and resilience benefits of energy efficiency and offer opportunities for improvement. So with that, I'll hand it to you, JP.
Thanks, Cassandra. My screen should be popping up momentarily. There it is. Well, thanks so much for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for everyone who's listening in. And I want to acknowledge my collaborators and co-authors Natalie Mims-Frick and Lisa Schwartz in this work, and the funding of the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. So a quick overview of what we're going to discuss today. I'm going to briefly present the motivation and a definition of reliability and resilience to get us on the same page. I'm going to tell you how we wrote this paper, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in terms of the examples because that will take too long. I'm going to spend most of the time in this presentation presenting the challenges that we're finding in terms of quantifying and monetizing the energy efficiency benefits with respect to reliability and resilience, and some opportunities that we're laying out for improvements. As a motivation and as a general background, energy efficiency has reliability and resilience benefit for the power system. Some of these have been actually identified already in the context of some of these large, widespread weather events, such as the California heat wave in 2020 or the winter storm in Texas earlier this year. Um, In parallel, we're situating this analysis around electric system planning processes, and these processes are used to ensure their future needs are reliably met with cost-effective supply and demand-side resources. So, at the core, these planning processes are defining investments and or decisions, procurement decisions for different resources, and energy efficiency is part of these resources. So, examining these planning processes is critical to understand the circumstances under which the benefits that energy efficiency can accrue are captured and potentially reflected. We believe that traditional reliability metrics and planning methods and some of the emerging resilience metrics may not fully capture the benefits from distributed energy resources in general, and in particular from energy efficiency. So this work that we are developing looks to understand how current planning processes and assessment methods and metrics capture the reliability and resilience benefits of efficiency. We look to identify some challenges and propose some opportunities for improvement. So, in terms of what reliability and resilience are, especially from resilience, the definition is evolving. On reliability, there is some agreement that we can define it as the ability of the system to deliver power in the face of routine, uncertainty, and operational conditions. The metrics and methods to assess reliability are generally standardized and accepted, and they differ depending on whether you're talking about generation, transmission, or distribution. There are specific metrics on each one of these domains in the power system. On resilience, it's generally a broad definition is the ability to prepare, adapt, withstand, and recover rapidly from disruptions. This comes from a presidential policy proclamation in 2013. While this definition is generally accepted, there's not really a set of metrics or methods to evaluate resilience yet. We can't right now understand or put a value on what is the amount of resilience on a given power system. We do know that this focuses on high impact, low frequency types of events, such as these big weather events. And the proposed metrics can fall under customer, community, grid, or economy-wide levels. So resilience has this particular property that it can be identified and measured in very different segments of society, some of which are really outside even the power system. As I mentioned, we're going to focus in three planning domains. The bulk power system, where long-term planning in vertically integrated utility settings is this common tool. In distribution systems, where we have distribution system planning developed across different states. And on demand-side management planning, where we have mostly benefit cost analysis types of approaches. So very briefly, I'm going to tell you, this is on the paper, and this is the only slide I'm going to spend explaining roughly what we did with these frameworks. In bulk power system planning, the main focus was resource adequacy assessments. Resource adequacy is essentially making sure that the system has enough capacity to meet peak demand plus a reserve margin to account for contingencies. So our main focus in this case was to study and understand to what extent the impact of energy efficiency on the reserve margin was captured. And we use examples from NERC and the Northwest Power Conservation Council to show how this is actually happening. On distribution planning, energy efficiency can be used to defer grid upgrades in a non-wires alternative kinds of projects. So we delve into some NWA examples for Xcel Energy, Con Edison, and Nevada Energy to understand to what extent the reliability or resilience were being accounted for in these non-wires alternatives. Finally, in demand-side management planning, we mostly focus on benefit cost analysis. And within benefit cost analysis, one very important component is the use of the value of lost load. The value of lost load, or VOL, is essentially a measure of the cost that accrues to customers when they don't have power available to them. And this is used to monetize the impacts of interruptions. Hence, it's a critical component of the benefits portion on a benefit cost analysis, or the cost, depending on how you frame it. And as Julie indicated in her presentation, there are 5 states that are currently considering reliability benefits in benefit cost analysis, and there's the ones listed here. So let's focus on the challenges that we found. In terms of reliability metrics, we find that traditional reliability metrics like SAIDI or SAIFI, these are average duration and average frequency of interruption indices that are usually captured at the system level, sort of across the whole service territory for a given utility, or at most at the feeder level. We're finding these are really availability metrics, and in that they do not really reflect the actual impact of interruptions on the consumption or fulfillment of end-use services that actually can be affected by energy efficiency measures. And they also don't reflect the reliability experience by each individual customer. So it reflects only averages, and this can have some equity considerations. IEEE standard 1366 from 2012, which, among other things, establishes the methods to calculate SAIDI and SAIFI, also introduced recently 2 customer-centric metrics. The customers experiencing long interruption durations, or CILID, and the customers experience multiple interruptions. Now, this is definitely going in the right direction, and these 2 particular metrics are geared towards some resilience interpretations insofar, particularly focused on long interruption durations or customers that are experiencing interruptions. Unfortunately, these standards still are just counting customers, and they do not reflect, again, the reliability experience. So there's still challenges into understanding how each individual customer's experience is affected. And the key component here and the emphasis is that energy efficiency typically is the impacts of energy efficiency are much easier to be felt or measured behind the meter. So essentially, is within each customers and their own energy efficiency adoption patterns where most of the reliability and potentially resilience benefits can accrue, but these metrics do not capture that. We believe that customer level metrics would identify high value or critical end uses, would ensure that these end uses can be consumed, at least at minimum sustainable levels, and ensure that the service for each customer meets a minimum reliability standard that recognizes levels of vulnerability and adaptability. Now, I'm going to clarify that this proposal goes way beyond what energy efficiency, what it's required for energy efficiency to be adopted. It has ramifications in many other, for many other distributed resources and for the way we regulate utilities. But we believe that these are foundational components of recognizing many of the benefits of energy efficiency that are not now being captured. On the value of lost load, we identify that in most of the benefit cost analysis, or some of the benefit cost analysis that we analyzed, the value use is the cost of energy not served. It's essentially the retail cost, and it's not really the cost of the consequences. So this is definitely a sort of a red flag that in benefit cost analysis, the right cost to use is the cost that accrues to customers of not having power on a given time, and that's definitely significantly higher than the retail value of power. The value of lost load is typically calculated as a single value per customer segment. So a single value for residential, commercial, and industrial that really doesn't capture the heterogeneity across customers. The current approaches for value of lost load are generally not time sensitive, which means that it's a single value across the year. And of course, we all feel that the interruptions are quite different if they occur, for example, at critical points in the evening versus in the middle of the night. Finally, the calculation of the value of lost load is usually based in short duration interruption information, and so we need to develop. There's a need to develop methods towards long duration, where energy efficiency, for example, that can maintain buildings interior temperature and humidity in buildings much better during long duration outages, could be also reflected and quantified. So now into opportunities. And how these challenges map to different opportunities for improvement. On performance metrics, Customer level metrics would allow, as I mentioned, to capture many local and behind the meter benefits that are not captured by traditional system level metrics, including some of the survivability of buildings upon interruptions. And they will also allow for managing performance of each customer, ensuring equity in the distribution of unreliability. And this would trigger investment decisions that could be quite different compared to what's happening right now. Our research showed that, and a second point, that energy efficiency and conservation are can be used as planning and operational resilience strategies. And this is what I opened with, referring to the California heat wave in 2020 or the winter storm earlier this year in Texas. These resilience benefits can be measured and valued, and potentially customers, we believe, could be compensated for supplying these types of conservation services to the system. Finally, restoration time is potentially one reliability and resilience benefit depending on the type of event that triggers the restoration. And we believe that energy efficiency, or we're found that energy efficiency can reduce overloading resulting from the transfer of load across distribution circuits when doing backup. And this can reduce the restoration time from some customers that can be backed up by other circuits that are not interrupted, or by microgrids that can be set up locally. This is currently not being studied. On the value of lost load, we make a general opportunity and recommendation to improve the data and methods used to monetize the impacts of interruptions. One particular approach is the use of hybrid methods that combine typical customer interruption cost surveys, which are right now the main way to understand how much customers are willing to pay for certain improvements in reduced interruptions, and combine these with economic models that are able to capture the whole system-wide, even economy-wide impacts of interruption, especially long-duration interruptions. So creating these two will lead to better estimates of how much does it cost to not have power, how much does it cost to lose a kilowatt hour, and eventually how much does it benefit for having less power lost due to energy efficiency. Further improvements can be also produced through the development of time-sensitive versions of the value of lost load. As I mentioned, the value of lost load is generally is not time-sensitive. It's a single value for the year. There's recent work developed by NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, that uses duration-dependent customer damage functions. So essentially, as the duration of the outage increases, and depending on when it happens in the season, the cost of that outage is higher. So these types of approaches would allow to identify how the time-sensitive aspects of energy efficiency may actually improve reliability and quantify it appropriately. Finally, in terms of methods, do we believe that benefit cost analysis frameworks are particularly well suited to capture the benefits of energy efficiency, but their current use is insufficient? We believe that treating energy efficiency as a resource, including the consideration of its time-sensitive value, would be an improved way to account for the reliability benefits especially in current bulk power system frameworks, and that energy efficiency can significantly improve the performance of other distributed resources, especially, for example, solar and storage, when they're operating in islanded mode and when serving lower amount of load due to energy efficiency, will improve their performance and the capacity to ride longer outages. Thank you very much for listening in, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, JP. Okay, and on the questions note, I will flag again to put any questions that you have in the chat as you think of them. And now we will move to our final presentation. We'll hear from Jimmy Liu, who is an evaluation specialist with IESO. Jimmy will give an overview of IESO's non-energy benefit study that quantified dollar per kilowatt hour values for various NEBs across 7 distinct sectors using relative scaling and willingness to pay surveys of program participants. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jimmy.
Thanks, Cassandra. Hello, everyone. And yes, I will be presenting Nebulous No More, the real valuation of non-energy benefits. I am an evaluation specialist, and today we'll be talking briefly about non-energy benefits I think we've gotten a pretty good overview of what they are, so that won't take too long. And then I'll give a bit of history and context of how the IESO, Ontario's Energy Efficiency Program Administrator, got to where we are today, and then some objectives and scope of the study that we undertook, some of the methodology and limitations, and then get to those juicy results of actual dollar values and some of the longer term outcomes and impacts of the study. So I think everybody here knows, but just in case, non-energy benefits are also known as non-energy impacts or co-benefits. They could be positive or negative from energy efficiencies, and they're just capturing all the things that go beyond the kilowatts and kilowatt hours, which we've all come to realize is really important benefits from the energy efficiency programs we run. Three main categories. I'm mainly going to focus on participant non-energy benefits, such as reduced maintenance or improved thermal comfort. So how did we get to this point in our journey? Well, at the IESO in 2015, we adopted just a global adder of 15% to the benefits we calculate from our cost effectiveness ratios. And that was applied to all sectors and all programs, blanket across the board. That was kind of the industry best practice at the time. And I think a lot of utilities or energy efficiency program administrators still take this approach due to the complexity of calculating non-energy benefits on explicit dollar per kilowatt hour value. In 2018, we undertook a study that was more of a jurisdictional scan to see what other people were valuating non-energy benefits at. And it kind of showed that 15% was kind of in the right ballpark, but that it did vary between different sectors like commercial, residential, low income, industrial. So last year and this year, we undertook this second study to survey our program participants to come up with actual valuations for our province, for our local programs, to see what we would come up with. We wanted to understand some qualitative things about non-energy benefits, and we got that from an expert panel or several expert panels. And then we wanted the quantitative dollar per kilowatts or dollar per kilowatt hour and dollar per participant values so that we could apply them explicitly to our cost effectiveness tests. We included seven different sectors, and we mainly focused on participant non-energy benefits. Those sectors are the residential, low-income, First Nations, commercial, industrial, institutional, and agricultural sectors. We did include one societal non-energy benefit. It was the illness cost of air pollution or air quality, essentially. And these other non-energy benefits that are typically considered greenhouse gas emissions, jobs, avoided demand and generation, we account for those separately. And they're not necessarily all given a dollar value, but we do quantify the greenhouse gas emissions avoided or jobs created. So they were not included in the scope of this study. Just a quick overview of our methodology. We screened some of the non-energy benefits and collected new ones from the previous study. Then we went out to survey with our past program participants. We took their values and we quantified, average rates for non-energy benefits for various programs and sectors. And then we're kind of currently in the process of applying them to our cost effectiveness tests and tools. So here's what the screening looked like. We took the phase 1 non-energy benefits. Some additional sectors were industrial and agricultural, which weren't really considered in phase 1. And then we consulted with industry experts and added some of those non-energy benefits. We then had a kind of Delphi panel of experts for each sector that really refined and came to a consensus on the non-energy benefits included. We then reviewed those outcomes from that survey and did some additional screening to see if they suggested a new non-energy benefit and whether that was actually quantifiable or not. And then we finally came up with the non-energy benefits we would include in our participant survey. And you can see on the right hand, there's two kind of boxes. One, the lighter colored box, starts off with all the non-energy benefits we initially considered. And then we eventually, through this funneling screening process, resulted in the handful of non-energy benefits that actually go out to participants that experts said were the most critical, the most unique for Ontario, or the most relevant to our programs. In terms of the participants surveyed, we were using past program participant databases. They were fielded online or by phone, depending on the sector. And people were asked to quantify non-energy benefits two different ways. One was relative scaling, where we kind of anchored their responses by asking them what their energy bills or energy savings they estimated to be, and what percent more or less of that do you value non-energy benefits at. And the second way was willingness to pay. So if you had to pay for this benefit, what kind of dollar value would you attribute to that non-energy benefit? And on the right, the table is just the number of respondents from each survey. You'll see that there's kind of a First Nations participant and First Nations community. The reason we separated that was because the community, some of the experts identified that there were non-energy benefits that accrued to the community as a whole, and we felt we needed to interview community leaders to try to get a better handle on those. And participants wouldn't necessarily experience that, such as energy independence was one of those. So when we got the results, there were 4 different ways we could have calculated the actual NEBS values. One was just using relative scaling. One was just using the willingness to pay. And then there were 2 hybrid scenarios, one with a preference to relative scaling. And then if they didn't fill out a relative scaling value, we would use the willingness to pay. And then the second hybrid model was to take the minimum of the 2 that wasn't 0. And the reason we went with that was because it was a we wanted to be conservative with the non-energy benefits we came up with, but also because just because one participant didn't fill out one way of quantifying non-energy benefits doesn't mean that they didn't kind of attribute a value to that. Maybe it just wasn't easy for them or comprehensible, or for some other reason they were willing to put a value on it in that way. So we thought we should go with the hybrid approach. It gives us the most data. And then we went with that approach, and we took the value of the non-energy benefits and divided it by the total gross savings values that we had in our database already. Just a couple of limitations before I go into the results. We recognize that non-energy benefits aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. They interact with each other, and so there might be some overlap. The participants in the survey participated in ISO programs between 2017 and 2019, so there's a bit of time between when we ran the study and when they probably experienced the benefit. And that's a really interesting balancing act we always have to do in evaluations, where you want them to have enough time to have experienced something, but also not make it too long that they forgot what the experience was. These non-energy benefits are based on the programs at that time, and that's changed since in terms of our program offerings. Also, the non-energy benefits are a subset of all potential benefits that participants could have experienced, as well as the survey being fielded during COVID. People might have had air quality and health, indoor air health, top of mind because of that. So here are the results for the residential, low-income, and First Nations sectors. On the left, you can see the non-energy benefits we included. Second to the left are measures that are applicable, which is relevant when applying these to cost effectiveness calculations. We don't want to apply a non-energy benefit to a program where, couldn't possibly generate that benefit. So if you have a retrofit program, but it doesn't include HVAC or envelope improvements, thermal comfort, probably isn't going to be a benefit your participants experience. And we also have a dollar per participant as well as dollar per kilowatt hour value in these cases, because most participants might be kind of similar, and that might average out over the course of the program. Or maybe you want to do it on a per savings basis. So as you can see, thermal comfort is consistently highly rated or highly valued, as well as a bit of reduced financial stress and indoor air quality. Those were the top non-energy benefits people valued from the residential sector. At the bottom, we have a range of total non-energy benefits experienced by these sectors. And in terms of the non-residential sectors, they have a few different non-energy benefits, but again, thermal comfort is quite consistent, as well as reduced buildings operations and maintenance for the commercial, institutional, industrial, and agricultural sectors. So these were some pretty interesting results that we got dollar per kilowatt hour values for. The reason why reduced spoilage is kind of low in the valuation is because only some people kind of experience that. We have all the data to be able to crunch those numbers, but currently we're just leaving it at that value, and we'll apply them to programs where reduced spoilage is a potential benefit people experience. So all in all, we have these results, and really what we come out with from the study is that we have a methodology now on how to quantify non-energy benefits. And hopefully I explained a bit of that so everyone else can, if you are interested in undertaking this, go and run it in your own jurisdiction. We have a lot of qualitative results that from our experts that help inform our program development in the future, as well as our marketing and communications. And now we also have explicit valuation for non-energy benefits. And that also improves how our programs operate, hopefully more efficiently, and also enhances our cost effectiveness calculations at the end of the day, which makes them more precise and hopefully more reflective of the benefits participants in our energy efficiency programs experience. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back off to Cassandra.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. And thank you to all of our presenters. I think everyone will be coming back on the screen shortly for Q&A. As you think of your questions, as I said, put them into the chat. Any that we don't get to, we will tackle during the Zoom session immediately to follow this in about 6 or so minutes. We have a question here that I'll put to you, Jimmy. How do these quantified NAB values compare to the 15% adder used previously? And I'll expand that a bit. I'm curious, Julie, if you have thoughts on that from your perspective from societal non-energy benefits, and how, if you have experience with states who've previously used an adder of some sort, but then have gone on to monetize impacts, and how that has compared the different values. So first to you, Jimmy.
Yeah, so we did back test this through our cost effectiveness tests just to see, what the difference would be, which is a great question. And it depends on the program. It depends on what measures are included in the program. But generally, the equivalent global adder, if you were to calculate it at the end, is either equivalent or higher with these valuations. And they're generally higher than the 15%. But for some programs, it is around 15%. But that's, depends on year to year, program to program. But generally, they're higher, I would say.
And to respond to your question, Cassandra, I don't have, actual data at my fingertips to respond to your question, but I have heard anecdotally that the 5 to 10% adders that are sometimes used, especially for participant NABs, are typically understated. And so I think that Jimmy is affirming that even with a 15%, that's on par or even lower than the findings from their analysis.
Thank you. I have a couple questions as we wait for any others to come through the chat. JP, what you mentioned a set of recommendations in your slides, and curious what specific research or studies would be needed to implement some of those opportunities that you described.
Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. That's a good question, and it's in particular one we're geared towards since we are a research organization. Well, the one first thing is that um, we need to rigorously identify and measure the efficiency and efficiency plus other DERs kinds of impacts on reliability and resilience. We mostly review the literature for what folks have done already, and we found some concrete aspects, for example, the efficiency impacts on resource adequacy. But when we go down to the distribution system level and behind the meter, there is much less clarity on what those are. There are some of them have been identified, for example, in avoided cost studies, but they are rarely rigorously quantified and measured. So there are no really clear methods to measure those. I would say another research space that is interesting is that resilience in particular it's kind of a societal type of benefit, and as Julie and Jimmy were pointing out, they fall well within the non-energy benefits and societal benefits that are typically captured in screening processes. But the problem is that it's not clear how we can capture those societal benefits that are outside the power system within a power system planning framework. And so that's really an open space to understand what are the resilience metrics that should be brought into a planning framework, and then how to incorporate this customer, community, and economy-wide impacts that are really not reflected in a power system model. And so how that's going to happen is really an open and active area of research by the U.S. Department of Energy.
Thank you. See, I'll pull one more of my questions here before we turn over to Zoom. See, Jimmy, what are you mentioned some limitations with the study that you all did. What are some challenges, kind of broadly speaking, with implementing non-energy benefits in cost effectiveness tests that you found either through that study or just from your perspective from other work?
Yeah, I think one of the most, for me, salient limitations of that study is that it's based on past programs, and energy efficiency is evolving, it's always changing. The types of programs, the kind of focuses at the ISO for energy efficiency are shifting. And so our future programs are not necessarily going to represent what our participants experienced in our past programs. And that, I think, could be a really important piece in terms of using these values going forward. If you want to calculate your cost effectiveness every year, hypothetically, the best thing to do would be to get this survey into the hands of your participants every year based on what they've experienced from the measures they've implemented, since that could change from, we kind of work in like 3 to 5 year frameworks. And so every time a new framework comes out, you could have a whole new slew of different kinds of measures, different kinds of benefits. People's attitudes might change. And so being able to maintain that constant currentness of the data, of the information, is something we're thinking about now, and how to integrate that into our evaluations process so that we're maintaining accuracy and precision and confidence in our results that we calculate. Because they're much higher, people are probably going to scrutinize them a lot more than a 15% adder.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, at the risk of going over, I'm going to switch us over now to the Zoom and close out here. So thank you again if you are not going to be joining us on Zoom. Thank you again to all of our speakers for their presentations and for you all attending. We would like to keep exploring these topics. And if you would like to do so too, please go to the Zoom link that's you can find it either in the chat box or on your Socio platform, and join us there now. We'll be there for the next 20 minutes or so. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.